Given the overwhelming consensus for a Labour landslide, how powerful do the panel think polls are, in informing the public's decision-making, not just representing it? Well, let's go to our expert pollster. I have a theory, Joe, that after the election, one of the big talking points will be how influential these MRP polls have been on people either voting or staying at home, or who they're voting for.
Yeah, I think a lot could be. I mean, we could do an entire show. You and I, Ian, not the rest. They wouldn't have to put up with it. Could do an entire show on the MRP polls. And I think their use in this election, particularly at a constituency level, is completely misplaced. Because anyone who actually knows anything about this knows that these polls, firstly, include a series of decisions and assumptions that vary from pollster to pollster, and crucially, don't take account of hyperlocal factors. This is not one contest, this is 650 individual contests. And so saying on a leaflet that this MRP survey or that MRP poll says that Labour can't win here or the Conservatives can't win here, that is a misrepresentation, an understandable misrepresentation, but nonetheless a misrepresentation of what the data should actually be used for. And so I think there is an issue around that, and it will be interesting to see, given the range of projections that the final MRP results have produced over the last couple of days. I think it will be really interesting to see if there is now an acceptance that it is more complicated than that, and that translating share of the vote to share of the seats, particularly to individual seats, is simply not the kind of thing that you can do when you have 650 constituencies of around 70,000 people each.
Anybody else want to comment on polls, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, and without naming individual constituencies, because I know the problems in doing that, I was looking...
You can name constituencies,
okay,
not candidates.
Okay, all right. Well, let's take the example of Chingford and Woodford Green, where there is a high-profile independent standing, probably the second most high-profile independent standing in this election. One of the MRP polls that came out earlier this week put that person on 2.8%. Now, nobody seriously thinks that they're going to get 2.8%, but of course, you can't take into effect local factors, and even if you could, there is no precedent for independents doing very, very well in many of the seats where they are. So the information it's drawing on is not relevant, and it's because it just kind of looks at where votes are moving in different places and tries to apply it where on the basis of what went before in that constituency. It's very hard to do. So I think there is a danger of people, because we have got a more sophisticated electorate that does and clearly is looking at tactical voting this time. It can reinforce decisions that are quite inaccurate. And I remember in the last election, there was one poll in, I think, Kensington, where it put the Lib Dems second. And actually, it ended up being very, very tight between Labour and the Conservatives. And this particular, which was an anti-Tory or anti-Brexit kind of poll, not pollster, but a tactical voting site, advocated a Lib Dem vote when actually the more strategic thing would have been to vote Labour, and it was actually a very narrow defeat for Labour there. So these things can deform people, because I think people see these statistics and think, oh, that's official. Give it a resonance that it actually, as Joe explained, it doesn't always deserve.
Yeah. Chingford's a really good example, because we just don't know. Yeah. There hasn't been any decent or even bad polling done at a constituency.
Is there a broader point too, though, do you think? The way that these MRPs in particular have been sort of overhyped almost, it has actually crowded out some of the other debate. An awful lot of debate, a lot of the media focus has been on polls rather than on policy positions.
I think that's because the politicians have avoided talking about policy to a large extent.
And it goes two ways. It's a fault on the politicians maybe for not being upfront about where the hard choices are. But of course, that's very easy then to have a comfort blanket about let's talk about the MRPs because they're coming out on almost daily basis.
I would like to say that as someone who's never shied away from a media appearance, you are
known in this building as Joe Tard.
Well, I don't know what
media time.
Oh, right, okay, that's fine.
Actually, I made that up, by the way. But
I'm less interested now. But seriously, if you've got to fill a 24-hour news cycle, and as Andrew said, the politicians are tightly controlling things, and there is a day to fill, it doesn't surprise me that you go for one of the 16 or 17 polls out that day.
How will we manage in those places where they don't allow polls during election campaigns?
Well, France, for example.
See
what happened there.
Yeah.
Alice?
I think they've had, in some ways, a positive effect and actually made people analyse policies a bit more closely. So, for example, in City AM, we have a piece today looking at what a Lib Dem opposition might be like, because polls have suggested that could be a possibility. So I think actually it can increase scrutiny. And I can only speak, I'm not an expert like Joe, but from my own personal experiences, I do think that the polling is perhaps going to influence how I vote. I think it makes me feel pretty safe because Labour are so obviously going to win, to vote for another party when otherwise I might not have bothered to vote at all. And I think there'll probably be quite a few people who feel that way, perhaps some shy Tories, perhaps some undecideds who at the last minute like, oh, well, we know the result, so I'll go Tory or I'll go Reform or whatever it might be. So I think maybe there are some positive consequences or consequences general, whether positive or negative.